The name of the class is called The Golden Cow That Jumped Over the Moon. And the idea behind the class is really, we're going to, as I sort of become my new nature in the way that I like to teach, I try to bring numerous sources from the Gemara, and I try to do it sort of at a hop, skip, and a jump, where giving people a view from the vision of the Tanoim and the Amoraim that I feel, unfortunately, sometimes, even if you come from a yeshiva kind of background, many times you're not involved in these particular Gemaras or these particular sections, or maybe they aren't presented in a kind of cohesive overall view. So what this is going to be is drawing from that, and I've broken down the class really into 10 parts. Don't get nervous, they're not long parts. But the 10 parts basically start off with an intro. Then we're going to go into a little bit about the idea of the golden calf, very little. Then we're going to go into a section called Dreaming About Money, because after all, I figured, we all do. How to become rich. That I put in the middle of the class, that way people will stay awake for that part. Good examples of being rich. The value of money. And then the negative impact that money can have on a person, and the negative impact that money can have even on righteous and holy people. And then from there we go that kosher money is holy, and therefore it's dear. And then we conclude the class with it's all about God. But the process that we're going to go by looking at each one of these sections is really built upon, obviously it's built upon the cow that jumped over the moon. But it goes much deeper than that. And that is because the moon, as we know, if we really look at creation, creation is one big setup. We've all been framed. We had been set up for a loss from the beginning of the word go. And all started from the moment that the moon was shrunk. Because the moon had no free will, so therefore it's not comparable to the later level of the trees which did not bear their fruit and taste the way they were supposed to, which was correlated to man's sin, because man and tree are one and of the same. But rather it was to indicate to us that it was the will of God that we would be in a world created darkness. And through this darkness, we would have a phenomenal, unique, but limited opportunity to create light. And through that, we could create partnership with God. As Rabbi Soloveitchik says, when God says, let us create man, the Soloveitchik learns that he was talking to man. He was saying to man, let us make man. I'll give you everything you need. I'll give you oxygen, respiratory, food, you name it, I'll give it to you. But the one thing you have to give back to me is free will, is your irat shamayim, is that awareness of me. We're going to play hide and go seek. I'm going to hide in a world of opaque nature, and you're going to seek the light and find me wherever I am, and I'm everywhere, so it shouldn't be very hard. So that becomes the game that we live in. That becomes the challenge that we are. The problem is, which is of course the problem and the blessing, because this is the beauty of free will, that we have that kind of double sword or double-sided choice, is that within that power of seeking God, we could also be blinded by that light. We could be blinded by the light because that could be the light glittering from gold or from silver. And gold and silver ultimately could become idols. And what really are idols? Right? So the difference between an idol and worshiping God is that the focus in worshiping God is that we understand God as the center of everything. Thus one of the names of God called Hamakom, which means the place, because God is everywhere. So therefore, God being the center of everything, we live our lives in a humble approach to appreciation that I have no right to anything and yet I get everything, and therefore I have hakarat tov, I have thankfulness to God. And in the same thing, therefore, how can I express that which God created me uniquely in this world? Right? I always say there's no such thing as two snowflakes that are the same. So certainly no two human beings are the same. And therefore, to waste our lives looking at other people and through them determining our behavior and how we act and how we dress is a horrible shame, because we have a uniqueness in us that nobody else will ever or has ever had. And unless we discover that uniqueness, we forfeit our beauty from what we are created in this world. So therefore, one who really believes in God sees creativity as a criteria to life. It's not really, I am creative and therefore I have my ego and this blows me up into who I am and now I have an identity. It's quite the opposite. It's HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's God who's embedded me with talent. And these little packages in my software are there for me to unfold and to express. So not bringing out my creativity is negating creation, because I'm supposed to be a part in creation. The opposite with idolatry is I determine who is God. I determine what God can do or what God can't do, or what this God can do, and he or she could fight with that God, and all the rest of it. Because at some point, some level, I have to realize that it's not really all about me. So I have to understand the greater world that I can't really claim credit to, so I can create a fictitious of paganism or of gods, of which therefore I ascribe to them these powers, but really it's all about me. I am God. And that becomes the challenge really in our free will as to how we go about that. So therefore, in this world of darkness, when we understand the light of God, we understand that there's an amazing beauty in the downfall, because the downfall occurs in the shrinking of the moon. And therefore the moon is the very thing which we know at the end of the days will return to being as bright as the sun. So therefore what we understand that even in that part of creation which is predetermined towards, let's call it deterioration, still innately in there is the success that will happen. So Maseh Makshav Tchila, the very last thing that happens is actually embedded in the very first thought. So therefore God thinks, how do I create an opaque world of darkness and evil through which man can ascribe to becoming independent but yet in the service of God? And the answer is that embedded in that downfall is its own restitution and its completion in its future state of a revealed moon. So therefore the cow that jumps over the moon, or the golden calf that jumps over the moon, is really the variety of these these two aspects. Either understanding that what you see is not what you get. So when you look at the moon today, that is not what you really are getting, because this moon is ultimately the moon which is the revelation of all creation. Or there is the golden glitter, if you want, of the jumping cow going over the moon that distracts us from that. So that's kind of like the beginning point, if you will. I mean, obviously money is probably one of those powerful forces in the universe that we know. People corrupt themselves over money. People learn to lie over money. And it becomes okay. It actually becomes a mitzvah to lie. People commit suicide over money. Money is an incredibly powerful force. I remember during the bubble break, there was a cartoon, I think it was in the New Yorker, but it was a bunch of people standing on line in a roof, in a building on Wall Street, waiting their turn to commit suicide, to jump off the edge. And all of a sudden one guy says, hey, wait a minute, my grandfather jumped off in 19, So there is this power of money that can destroy one's life or live one's whole life for it. Remember, there was also a t-shirt. T-shirt used to say, the person with the most amount of things when they die wins. And then somebody else came out with a t-shirt that says, the person with the most amount of things when he dies still dies. So, except for Korach, nobody takes it with them, right? So, therefore, although there was also a cute cartoon, I remember in the New Yorker, there was like a nouveau dead guy, and there was an angel, and he was like obviously showing this person around, and the two of them are in the foreground, and there's a Delpak four-sided with angels and computers and this and that, and then there were dead people with wings and flannel jacket suits and briefcases flying in and out. And this little host angel is telling the nouveau dead guy, says, yeah, those are the ones that did take it with them. And they're still cutting the deals and still rolling and so on. But anyhow, this is really what we want to look at, is this sacrifice that people are willing to make for money. And that same sacrifice, really, believe it or not, as we'll see a bit later, is the sacrifice that we can actually acquire life instead. It's the sacrifice of Yitzchak, which is connected to the half shekel, which we'll get to a little bit later. But it's all about power, and the power can be used for good, or the power can be used for bad. Okay, so the starting point is something that I think all of us are familiar with. It's Gemara in Sanhedrin. It's also Gemara in Brachas. By the way, I speak Ashkenazi Vosvos Hebrew, so if you want, you can put on the subtitles here. We'll translate it to modern Ivrit, just so that you're not surprised. But the Gemara in Sanhedrin quotes the famous Gemara, which we all know from Brachot, from our Kriya Shema, which is, it says, and you will serve God with all of your, and then we come to Mo'odecha. And the Gemara asks, what is Mo'odecha? So on the one hand, the Gemara talks about with all of your power. On the other hand, it also talks about with all of your character traits. But it also talks about that which is all of your money and your finances. Because as the Gemara recognizes, there are people who actually love money more than life. And this is rooted in a very deep idea from the Baal Shem Tov on the word Mo'odecha, which is also connected to the word Mo'od. Mo'od is very. When you look at the 7 days of creation, nowhere do you see God say, I mean, unless he was a rapper, God says, yeah, that's bad, right? Everything is good, or it's nothing, or it's double good. Where is bad? So the Midrash Rabbah comes along and says that God created bad, or evil, or what have you, on the 6th day. And where do you find that creation? In the words, very good. Where all the other days were good, on the 6th day was very good. And the Medrash says, what's very good? Yes, the Yetzer Hara, the angel of death, right? The Satan, right? This is like a really M&S planet we're living on here. God says, whoo, this is really good. This is like, look, you got the angel of death, and that's what God is calling very good. It's kind of wacko. So the Baal Shem Tov explains that that's not what the Medrash means. The Medrash means that it's the word very, which is the creation of evil. Good is good, but when it becomes distorted, it becomes bad. When it becomes T-O-O much or T-O-O little, then it's no longer the good it was innately created to be. And therefore, this Tov Ma'od is the creation of man, which is why the letters for the word Ma'od is Adam. So when man is no longer in harmony and in sync as he or she is created to be, when we go, God forbid, into confusion, which leads to illusion, and we think, that's who I am, and we're off the mark, that becomes very. That's the distortion that loses that clarity. So this is the Mo'odecha, when all of a sudden, rather than being Adam and seeing everything, including the power of gold and silver in the service of God, when we lose that focus, it becomes Mo'odecha, it becomes my power, koich b'yodi otzmi, my strength, my ability. That becomes the unfortunate level that leads towards people could loving money even more than life. I'm assuming there are a few of you here that probably remember Jack Benny, the famous Jack Benny line. The guy comes over with a gun and he says, your money or your life, and Jack Benny doesn't say anything. And the guy says, I said your money or your life, and Jack said, I know, I'm thinking, right? So there are people who, unfortunately, that is a real serious decision. The Gemara says in Shabbos, it says there that people who spoil themselves with riches, quote the Gemara, covering themselves with gold and silver are considered as worthless when it comes to being productive in society. Not a purpose for being alive. Bling, I guess you might call that. And how does the Gemara actually deal with this? It's a very amazing insight from Rabbi Nachman of Breslov based on the Gemara in the Dorim. Gemara in Dorim there says that all the Nevi'im were wealthy. And Rashi points out that when the Navi would have, when the prophet would have his prophecy, he would appear as if he was Meshugana, as if he was like mentally insane, out of his mind. And Rabbi Nachman says that this is a remez, this is teaching us that when a person receives a tremendous amount of money, like the prophets, but they have not made themselves into a holy vessel, then they actually are receiving what's called fallen prophecy. And the money can destroy their lives and bury them, as we'll see later. And therefore, this idea of the power through money is also reflected in a very cute Gemara in Baba Metzia. Daf Yomi will be into in a few more months. It says there, the Gemara says that a person who is a lender will not believe a borrower if they're in court over a claim. But the borrower will tend to believe the lender. Why? Why would Reuben believe Shimon more than Shimon would believe Reuben just because one guy made the loan and the other guy took the loan? So the Gemara offers a very interesting insight into human psyche. Because the lender believes that the borrower, i.e. the poor guy who needed the money, is only poor because obviously he has sinned and is of bad behavior and therefore has not received the appropriate blessing. And the borrower will believe the lender because he will live under the insane assumption, well, if he's rich, he must be rich because he's obviously a good man who doesn't sin. So that is human psyche. We fall into this insanity of believing that a person's financial status is an indicator of the quality of the soul by which, after 120 years, when they stand before God, not impressed. It's not impressive. You know, you can't really come into heaven with a Lexus. It doesn't really work. So, taking this to the next level, part 2, the idea of the golden calf. The Gemara in Brachos actually points out a very interesting thing. It says that one of the most difficult tasks that Moshe had leaving Egypt was getting the Jews to agree to go get the money out of the Egyptian homes. I mean, obviously they said, isn't it enough that we're getting out with our lives that we have to then go and also ask for money? We don't want the money. So in a certain sense, the Gemara says that God forced the Jews to take the money. And in the end, the Gemara says that one who fills his stomach, meaning one who is satiated with their money, is somebody who can perform all kind of evil. In fact, that's what the Gemara says, that when a person receives money as well, and they don't use it in its proper way, which we'll see in a minute, it's called right money and left money. If that happens, then this is actually called fallen kindness. God extends money as kindness, and if we misuse that, it's dropping, or the kindness becomes fallen. In fact, ironically, the Gemara in Brachot also goes on to say that Moshe blamed God for the building of the golden calf because he had warned God, metaphorically speaking, that by giving them too much money, they would come to this kind of a tragedy. The Gemara in Sanhedrin adds on one more note on that as well, and it says that the problem with the Jews having too much money during that particular episode, or maybe any episode, is because it says that a person who becomes very wealthy can live under the illusion that he is above God's law. You know, mitzvot or whatever, because I really need this connection to God. Somebody posted on Facebook the other day from the Kutzker Rebbe, from Rav Hutner, Zichron Bracha. He said there that it's not that we pray to get out of trouble, but it's rather God puts us in trouble so we will pray. So there really is an idea that this concept is when a person feels financially secure in every way, they suddenly feel they don't need God. I'm sure you all know the story or the joke about the guy who's drowning and swimming and praying to God, if you just get me, and then finally gets to shore and says, never mind God, I got here okay, I'm really fine. So that really is the challenge we need to understand, and this is called the challenge of wealth. When I was in yeshiva, there was Moshe Coleman, a friend of mine from Los Angeles, and a real character, grew up in Anaheim. I think he was Anaheim before Disney. And one day, one of the rabbis is giving a class, and he talks about to the Omer b'nisayon, to stand in the test of money is probably one of the most difficult challenges a person could face. And of course, Moshe jumps up in the middle of the room and he yells out, "Oh Lord, test me. Lay it on. Let me prove to you my loyalty and how I will be able to react." I have to just tell you, there are people, I have been fortunate enough, I'll just tell you a quick personal story. I was once involved in business with a man, unfortunately no longer alive. He was a Gera Chassid from London. He was in the late 70s, early 80s, valued as a multi-billionaire, which was not as common as it is today. He was one of the largest cocoa traders in the world at the time. And we were staying at his house for Shabbat, and myself and a friend, we were coming back to Israel, and just so you could place the year, he was going to New York for the day on the Concorde. So the Rolls was in the shop, so we had to go in a Volvo station wagon, right, 1979, 1980. He had like one of the first phones in a car, and he's sitting in the front with a chauffeur who with the white gloves, and Label and I are in the back. And as we're driving, we are listening, obviously, to the business. He's bringing in General Electric refrigerators that got to Hamburg 2 days earlier, and they won't open up the port. And he's yelling at this guy in Germany, he's got to open them up, and this and that. And in the middle of this, My buddy sneezes. And the guy like this, without a blink of an eye, puts his hand over the phone and he speaks Yiddish, but he turns around and says, "Be gebenched, may you be blessed," like Gesundheit. I mean, in the middle of it all, his ear had not lost that kind of sensitivity. And then, which I found even more incredible, because okay, fine, we were like, house members in a way. He's talking to the man now back at his main office, and the guy says, and our host says, "Ooh, I don't have any American money." So the guy says, "You know what? I'll send down Timothy," not a Jewish name, right? "I'm going to send down Timothy, and he'll have $1,000. Give him your passport. He'll stamp your passport. You'll be fine." So this Hasidic Jew looks out the window and he says, "It's raining. I don't want Timothy to catch a cold. I'll tell you when to send him down." And here's a man who was a member of the Queen's Bowler Hat Club. I mean, this was a very serious mover and shaker. But it meant nothing to him. To him, all this money, all this power was just an incredible opportunity that he felt blessed by God to be able to do good and bring good into the world. He never saw it that this is who I am. He rather saw it that this is a gift that God has given to me to be able to go forward. And that's why the Gemara says that the rectification of the sin of the golden calf was the giving of the half shekel. To go a little bit into a Kabbalistic idea, the Gemara tells us there are certain words that are used throughout the Talmud of currencies. And a shekel is worth 20 gorar rather. And a half shekel, therefore, is worth 10 gorar. Now, 10, as we know, always represent the 10 points, the 10 chakras, if you will, or I call them the shockings, the 10 shockings in the person that are the 3 levels towards connecting to heaven, the 7 points in the body, and through there becomes a complete illumination. So the story is like this. On the one hand, the idea of the half shekel teaches us that all human beings in the eyes of God are of equal creation. That's really what it's all about. No one person has a greater value than another person. The second lesson is that we need each other, because I'm only a half. And without you, I'm nothing. Together, we are a whole. But it also teaches me a deeper message. Although I need to join with you and become friends with you, because by myself I'm only half a shekel, on the other hand, I have innately inside of me these 10 points, which means that I have embedded the capability to fulfill every purpose and reason I am living. When God creates each one of us in our unique journeys through our lives, every person we encounter, everything we experience, be it from poverty to wealth, from health to God forbid, all of these are the exact, specifically designed elements we need to reach personal fulfillment. It's all in us. And this is why this idea of Gerar, which is the reference to the coin, is also the name of the city, Gerar, where Yitzchak was associated. Because Yitzchak was the idea of self-sacrifice. Self-sacrifice is not a depressing, negative thing, because the name Yitzchak means laughter or humor. So therefore, Yitzchak had the amazing ability to be able to laugh at life, to be able to see life in a way where he could understand the irony, the divine humor in everything, and yet at the same time take every element of life as extremely important and serious, to the point where he therefore could even sacrifice his life, and according to some Mekubalim, was the first person who actually went through the resurrection of the dead. That there is an opinion that he actually was slaughtered by his father Abraham, and then he was the one that came back to life. I don't want to go into that, but if you want one little token on that, that's why of the 3, I always like this, it's not 7, the 3 of the forefathers, right? Each one of those 3 correlate to each one of the first 3 blessings of the Shemona Esrei, of the standing prayer. And what is the second prayer? The resurrection of the dead, which is Yitzchak. Okay, so let's go back off onto something else for a minute, just kind of like a little fun sidebar for a minute. And this is called dreaming about money. These are just random, as Obama would say, R2D2. No, it's actually like, what was that? ER. These are like random selections from the Gemara about people who have dreams. and the power of dreams and the way that they affect money. So Gemara in Brachos says there are 5 things that it says about seeing an ox in a dream. But the good news is if the ox is eating you, it means you will become rich. I guess there won't be any oxidant. If also the Gemara Bracha says, if you see a planted hadas, I think that's called a myrtle, it means wealth is on the way. If you see a snake in the dream, it means your income, your parnasa, has been prepared. But if the snake bites you, then you're going to get double your income. But if you're stupid enough to kill the snake, then you lose all the money.
How do we know that?
This is a good question, but that's not for the Talmud. This is why do we study Talmud questions, which is a wonderful question, and I invite you to do your homework on that, but I can't go there right now. The Gemara also continues and it says, if a person sees a small pomegranate in a dream, his business will grow. If it's a big pomegranate, it'll be very successful. And if it's olives, his business will also be successful. If you see Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah, which I don't know how we would recognize him, but if you did, then the Gemara says you are definitely on your way to megabucks. And in case you don't know who this was, I also brought the Gemara in Beitza that says that, as an example, Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah was so wealthy that his flock, there's a law in Jewish law that you have to tithe your firstborn from the herd each year. His herds produced 130,000 tithe animals yearly. Okay. And then the Gemara says that if you see any fruit except for an unripe date, that is a good sign. And the best are turnips, but with their stem. Why? Because the Gemara says that Rav, one of the great Amoraim, said he only became rich once he had a dream of a turnip with a stem. Okay, so that's dreaming about money. Let's go now into how to become rich. It'd also be kind of appropriate, because this is obviously not just something unique to our generation. Gemara Nida, one of my favorite Gemaras, is this particular Gemara. Talks about the wise men of Alexandria who came to Yeshua ben Hanina, and they said to him, how does a person become rich? Actually, there's a series of questions, but we're only focusing on this particular one. And the Gemara uses the same template for each one of them, but the template here is, he says, well, a person should spend more time at work and make sure that all the business that he or she does is honest business. Naki kapayim, clean hands in business. And the Gemara said, they said, but many people did that and they failed. So the Gemara says you have to pray for your money, because it says, Zahav sheli, hakesef sheli, nu'am Hashem. God owns all the money. And so therefore the Gemara's conclusion is you have to do both. But, this is why I love this Gemara. The Vilna Gaon steps up the bat. And, if you ever want to, there's a certain vernacular, maybe some of you know this, I call it yeshivish vernacular. It's kind of like in Flint. If you know how to talk yeshivish, you can move among certain circles and they'll kind of let you move. So if you ever want to be cool, you got to learn these 2 words, girsas hakra, which means the way the Vilna Gaon modifies a text in the Talmud. If you're already talking about girsas hakra, okay, you can come and eat cholent with us. But that's like a key term to really be yeshivish, is girsas hakra. So the girsas hakra here takes out of what we call in the Talmudic language the havamina. He takes out of the even initial thought the words work more. Don't even think for a minute that working more will have any equation to becoming rich. Don't think of that. Working honestly, he leaves that. Prayer, for sure. But don't think that working more has anything to do with making more money. I have a friend of mine used to be the head psychiatrist at Sloan Kettering Hospital in New York, Australia. And he would tell me about all the different clients he had. One guy was the head of the Ringley Barnum Circus. One guy was a major banker from Chase, this, that. One guy was from Tokyo. All over the world. Very wealthy, powerful people. He said, there's one thing I never heard, and that was anybody said, I wish I'd spent more time at the office. So working more can actually be the opposite of actually making money, because it diminishes, although we have to live in the real world, we have to function according to the way life is all about, On the other hand, we have to also realize that at the end of the day, it's all about God, which will be the conclusion of this class. The Gemara says, and this we all know, it's a famous Gemara in Baba Basra that says there, because our financial income is anyhow predetermined on Rosh Hashanah. How much a person will make during the year is determined there. Although we're going to see later in the Gemara, in the class rather, that that's not really the case. That's the default. What we're supposed to get, if we don't do anything about it, is on Rosh Hashanah. But at the end of the day, there are other factors that can actually change that. The Gemara, Tosfos in the Avodah Zarah reveals that success and blessing in business comes from having fixed time in studying Torah. Because we have an idea mostly associated with food, which is called Iker and Tafel, that which is primary and that which is secondary, which doesn't necessarily mean in terms of size, it means more in terms of quality. And therefore, even if a person has to work many hours and has to work hard, if they have a fixed moment in their day, even 15 minutes a day, where they turn off this world and they turn on a world of wisdom, and that's the part of the day that they long for, then it actually establishes that the nature of their life is a life about becoming wise and becoming real, rather than merely focusing on becoming rich, which, as we will see later as well, can be dangerous. If more actually, I have it right here now, it's the Baba Basra. This is, oh no, this is not the one I'm thinking of, but this is kind of cool also. This is Talmudic feng shui. The Gemara says, in Baba Basra, it says, if you put your bed and, thank you, if you put your bed and your table in the north of your house, you will become rich. But if you put them in the south of your house, you will become wise. And then the Gemara quickly throws in, and if you become wise, then you'll become rich. So, probably better to go for the south. So, here we're going to move now into what are good examples of how to be rich. How does one find the blessing? This one might have mixed reaction, but it's also Gemara Bava Metzia. It says that honoring one's wife brings wealth. And actually, the Gemara also over there says, if you ever, by the way, if any of you are married or ever planning to be married, this is the Amud in Shas that you must learn. And I'll tell you how you could remember it. Because might think that it's just a bunch of Baba Misas, but it's really Baba Metzias. They're real Metzias that you're finding here. And where are they? On Amud Nun Tet 59a. And how do you remember that? Because Nun Tet is what not to do in a marriage. So it's a great Amud to take a look at, and there's a tremendous amount of wealth over there. That Gemara there says, you know, if your wife is short, bend over and listen to her. There's a lot of wisdom to be found in married life. But it says that there's no blessing in one's home except through the merit of the wife. The Gemara in Sanhedrin says that understanding and wisdom can also lead to rich. Baba Kama, the Gemara says the easy way is hang out with rich people. And it says in Shavuot, the old expression, it says if you touch an anointed man, you become anointed. That the idea that money, richness, sort of rubs off. I always felt that, like, because if you're walking with a really rich person who sneezes, what they would call chump change falls out of their pocket, that could be enough to buy an apartment or something. So right there, you know, you're like close to be able to pick that up. The Gemara Bava Metzia says that another way to increase your profitability is to do business with partners, because the idea that the whole is greater than the sum total of the parts. So therefore, maybe your merit, my merit, is not enough to really break through, but collective merit can be beneficial to financial success. And then the Gemara in Bikurim says that anyone who keeps a Sefer Torah in their home ultimately will become filled with riches. The Gemara in Eruvin suggests, how do you protect windfall profits? So the Gemara says that anybody who earns a lot of money with no effort can very easily lose that money through the evil eye. And therefore they should invest some of that money into mitzvot, such as even purchasing a Sefer Torah. The Gemara in Horios says, if you really want to know if you'll be successful in business, I'm not sure people still do this today, but you can try it, buy a rooster. And if as you're starting your business, you see that the rooster is getting nice and fat, that's a good sign that you will be successful. The Gemara in Ketuvah says that in terms of investments, the best investment is always to buy land, and then houses, and then food fields, and then orchards, and last but not least, which I find surprising, grapevines. Don't know why. In Menachos, the Gemara says that if you buy your tchelas for your tzitzis from an expert, you will find success in business. Maybe that's because what we were talking about before, the connection between tchelas and tachlis. And Jewish business people, it's always about tachlis. So it's the bottom line, where's the deal coming? The Gemara Shabbos says that washing one's hands generously with a lot of water leads to wealth. And of course, the famous Gemara in Shabbos and also in Tainus, that the way to become wealthy is by tithing or meiser your money, giving honor to the Torah and honor to Shabbat. Because the famous Gemara in Tainus says that the only time we are invited to actually test God is through taking off 1/10 of our income. And you have to be careful here, because the Gemara elsewhere says that one should not give away too much of their money, in which you suddenly wind up becoming dependent on charity. However, when it talks about taking off 1/10, you really need to talk to somebody who's knowledgeable. It's not gross income. It's not gross revenue, I should say. There are tax deductions even before you take your 10th. So just understand, if you're going to do that, because it's a heavy move, but it really could put you to the acid test. Do you really believe in God, right? The guy falls off the cliff and he's holding on to the little branch. He says, God, if you're out there, I'm yours, just save me. And God says, if you really believe in me, let go. And he says, oh, okay. Anyone else out there? Right? So if you really want to put yourself to the test, this is the test of giving 1/10. And the Gemara concludes there. It says if you do it, God will make you so rich, you will scream out, enough. Okay, the value of money. Value of money, I bring here the Gemara on Shabbos, and this is what I meant by positive and negative money. It's not just about money. Life is organic. Everything we have and live in, it's all living. In the Kabbalah, there is no such thing as something not alive. That's why the Yismach Moshe in his Sefer writes that even people can be reincarnated as a rock, right? Even though Paul Simon says, and a rock feels no, got the lines were there, yeah. But the idea is that everything has life in it. There is nothing which is inanimate. Because the reason, not the why, but the how, not the how, but the why everything exists is because it is at some point connected to the will of God. If that digit at this moment is no longer in the will of God, it doesn't matter what it is. It's gone. It doesn't exist. And if it exists, it means that there is a live connection at that moment with that point. So therefore, rock, vegetable, animal, human, angelic, it all exists from the central focus of the will of God. That's everything. That is the why. The how is particular. Trees have xylem and phloem. We have respiratory systems. Whatever. That's already the specific. But the why is that connection to God. Therefore, everything that comes into this world, because it all comes from the letter Bet of Bereshit, which is the duality of this world, because prior to the duality of the world, it was only the Aleph of the oneness of God. So therefore, God created other, and that other is the darkness of which we have our choice between oneness and Elohim Acharim, other than the one God, the illusion of that. And so therefore, everything has a double side to it. So even money. So the Gemara says, in Shabbos it says, that money can be received, or God's flow can be received from the left or from the right. If it comes to the right, it brings with it wealth, honor, and life. If it comes to the left, it brings wealth and honor. Either way, in other words, you can have money and you can have honor either way. The only difference is when it comes to the left side, it does not bring life. The money does not bring life. I posted this class and people started commenting on Facebook, and the subtitle of the class is, why do people love money more than their life? And so somebody wrote, well, with money you can have a good life. And the answer is yes, but that's only if the money came down on the right side. If the money came down on the left side, it could be disastrous. In fact, the Gemara also says on that, it says in Bava Metzia, that, you know what? I'm going to actually have to jump to that thought because I don't want to lose it now. The Gemara says that a person who receives money from the wrong side. Oh, here we go. Sorry, 1 second. Okay, here we go. I'm just going to roll it back 2 steps. The Gemara first says that the danger with having a lot of money, similar to what we said before, is that a person may learn less Torah and their heart swells with pride. And then the Gemara in Tainus says that sometimes God will give evil people whatever it is they ask for. God will give it to them willingly. The Gemara says why? So that God should not have to listen to their prayers. The Gemara explains this means this is called being shut up by God with the curse of success. That person is buried in their golden tomb, if you will. So, coming back to the earlier point here, the Gemara in Baba Metzia says, in terms of the value of money, it says that a person should carry money with them at all times. And the Gemara also asks, what blessing is made before counting one's money? The appreciation of bringing that money down through the channel of the right side means appreciating that it comes from God. And that's why the Gemara gives an answer. It says, if in business you successfully close a deal, hint, hint, the blessing is that one should make the blessing who is good and does good. Tohu metiv. This is actually the blessing made on closing a good business deal. Talmud says that, again, similar to what we said before, this time in Matos, to be blessed without limit is to receive so much wealth that one's lips, except for dental problems, one's lips wear out from saying enough. And this is my favorite, or among my favorite Gemaras of all time. Like today, like in the olden days, the olden Westerns, you come into the bar and you put your gun on the table. And depending on like what kind of gun you had, that was kind of like your status symbol, you know. And then, you know, if you're in LA, because nobody walks in LA, your status symbol is a car. But in Manhattan, certainly nobody knows what you drive, so it's your suit or your Mont Blanc or all the little symbols of status. So what was called a Talmudic symbol of status? What was somebody showing off in Talmudic times? So the Gemara in Baba Metzia says that there was a guy who, when he plowed his field, had a plow made of all silver, right? You could just see like the little roll symbol on the side of the plow or something, but like that, even then, that was, oh, check out that plow, right? So I kind of thought that was sort of, something's never changed. The Gemara in Aaron, by the way, speaking of rich, okay, we mentioned Rabbi Lezer before, but the Gemara gives a kind of a basic bottom line as to what's called rich in Talmudic terminology. It says that you have to own at least minimal 1,000 ships, none of which are in the port because they're all out at sea doing commerce, and 1,000 cities. And if you do that, then you're allowed to play golf on the Talmudic golf course. The Gemara in Gittin says that if somebody says, God forbid, if somebody says your friend died, you should believe them, but if somebody says your friend became rich, don't believe them. Because the chances of somebody dying are much more likely than the chances of somebody you know winning the lottery and going through that. In fact, I'll just show you here for a second on that. King David, you have it here on page 5,000. King David says, okay, this is Gemara Yuma. King David there says, when he spoke of, quote, the land of the living, what did the Gemara mean by the land of the living? It referred to Costco, Walmart, it referred to marketplaces, shopping malls. That was what David HaMelech said, the land of the living. And you know, I don't know if you've ever seen, there's a book called, in English I think it's called Heavenly Jerusalem. It's called Yerushalayim Shel Ma'ala by Rabbi Getz. And it's all about Jerusalem in the 1800s, with the yellow fever and with tsetse fly and with no food. And you just walk into Talpiot today, am I going to that supermarket? Am I going to this supermarket? Am I going to... How many supermarkets are just in Talpiot? And they're all filled. It's unbelievable. And we don't even like... It's like we're like walking inside unbelievable miracles, and we just have to somehow tune into that. It's incredible. It's what we're living. As we were walking down here, I said, you know, when the prophets were prophesying about the ingathering of the exiles, they were like looking at us. I was mentioning in my house, my upstairs neighbor is from Russia. Above her is from Paris. My wife is from Finland. Across the hall is Brooklyn. Okay, that doesn't really count. And they have all. But it's unbelievable. It's all and I think we even have one Israeli. I mean, it's just unbelievable what happened and what we're in the middle of here. But when King David said at the end of that verse, turning death into life, what was an example of turning death into life? Rashi says it means a person going from being poor to rich. That's why I thought it was interesting to sort of connect it back to this idea as well. Okay, a few more on this, and then we're going to go into the last couple of sections. The Gemara says that when in the days of King Solomon, people became so rich that silver had zero value. And the Gemara Menachos says that King Solomon, when he wrote, some people give the impression of being rich and have nothing, and then there are those who are poor but have great wealth. Just thought that was an interesting side. But here's the famous one that everybody knows, and of course they equate it with the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot, but I think it's actually the more in Talmud. When Alexander the Great was talking to the rabbis, what we call the Chachamei, the wise men of the south, he said, who is a rich man? And of course we all know the answer, one who is happy with his portion. And I was once with a guy in Switzerland, a very religious Jew in Lugano, and we were driving, and he said, if I wasn't religious, I would really have a house 15 times the size of this, but I have to kind of, keep myself, humble. I said to him, humble, like flying through these curving mountain roads of to get to the train station or whatever. And we're driving in like the state-of-the-art Porsche. And I said to him, this Porsche, this is humble? He says, what are you talking about? It's explicit Gemara. It says, who is a rich man? One who is happy with his Porsche. Okay. The Gemara says there are three ways to be rich. Classic, a lot of money and a lot of things. More important, having a wife or husband of good character. And as we get older, most important, having a bathroom close to the dining room. That's the Talmud. It really kind of deals with things as it is. Also, the Gemara says when King Solomon built the first temple, he planted inside the temple golden trees, right? We always say, gold doesn't grow on trees. Wrong. King Solomon built trees that were made of gold, and they had golden fruit. And the Gemara says when the wind would blow the fruit off of these trees made of gold, this is how the kahuna, the kohanim, the priests, would gather up these fruits, and that's how they supplemented their income. However, I just want to put at the end of this section, the Gemara in Erechin, when it talks about values and this and that, the bottom line is a dead man has no monetary value. So again, this is not the things that we live for, these are the things that we can live with and to be able to use and to do tremendous goodness. In fact, I didn't put this in the class, but it just popped into my mind. There's an amazing medrash that says by Moses, he wrote, according to the medrash, he wrote the prayer called Ishtabach, which is at the end of our Psukei D'Zimra in our prayers, and has 15 praises of God. These represent the 15 Shir Malot, the 15 steps into the Holy of Holies, into the temple, and so on, in the name Yud Kei, and the 15 steps of Passover night, etc., etc. And this was the greatest moment of his life. Now, think about Moshe's life. I mean, it could have been great that his mom put him in a little basket in the river and he lived. That's already great. It could have been great that the Egyptians tried to kill him and his neck turned into marble and he escaped and went and found the amazing woman Zipporah, living with Jethro. It could have been great just doing the play. It could have been great splitting the ocean. It could have been awesome going 40 days, 40 nights, no water, no food, up on Mount Sinai. Where in Moses' life did he hit the pinnacle of joy? Guess what? It's when he sat down with the guys from Ernst & Young, with the accountants, and they went over the books and the balance sheets. And, if you know anything about accounting, there's every business, every situation, if you get the lines this close, that's good enough even for the government. Nobody gets it this close. But Moses sat down and he did an accounting of every piece of money that went into building the tabernacle and the Mishkan, and the lines came out perfect. And from that incredible ability to be able to account for every single thing properly used, he wrote Ishtabach, and the greatest of all praises to God. It's kind of a very deep thing to think about. You know, it reminds me, I guess, it's a little bit of a tangent, but it's one of my favorite stories, so I'll share it with you anyhow. There are a group of Hasidim standing around arguing whose Rebbe is more powerful and mystical than the other's Rebbe. And this one says, oh, my Rebbe's so great, he can, And this one, yeah, my Rebbe's so great, he came to a river, he took off his belt, and he threw it on the water, and he walked across the river. And the other one, the third one says, my Rebbe is the most amazing Rebbe. Why? Because whatever he says, God does. And at that moment, a Litvak from the Chafetz Chaim Yeshiva has been listening to this, and he comes along, and he says, gentlemen, my rabbi is greater than all your Rebbes. He said, what? How could this be? He says, yes, my rabbi is so incredible, whatever God says, he does. So, think about it. Okay. So we were talking a little bit before some of the ideas here of the negative side impact on a person with their money. By the way, speaking of marriage, the Gemara says a person who marries for money is in great danger of losing all of that money and, God forbid, having children that do not turn out correctly. Here's what I find interesting, is the idea of the negative impact of money upon righteous people. The Gemara in Baba Basra says, which is a general halacha, that when you're in a store and you get money and you get your change, you're supposed to count your change. The Gemara says that you should count your change even if the man who's behind the counter is an honest man, because we all have a weakness when it comes to money. But it does remind me of a joke. This guy comes into this restaurant and he asks the owner of the restaurant, he says, is this restaurant kosher? And the guy says, what do you mean is it kosher? And he points on the wall, and there's a big poster of Rebbe's and Moses. And so the guy says, you know what, tell you the truth, I would rather see Moses standing here, your picture on the wall, than see you here, that I'm going to actually trust you. Anyhow, so the Gemara also says that, I'm sure many of you are familiar, if you see, the Gemara says, if you see a righteous man or woman sin at night, you can know that by the day they have already repented, that they regret it. Except, right, I'm sure some of you have heard this idea before, except if the sin had to do with money. If it had to do with money, then everybody is suspect and nobody is above the law, and that even this holy man or person is not given that benefit of the doubt. The Gemara in Sanhedrin goes even further, that nobody's above the law. It says that even a Kohen Gadol, the high priest, when it comes to monetary issues, can be brought before a simple bet din, a court of only 3 laymen. The Gemara in Sanhedrin also says that wealth is so powerful, it can bring down the righteous person, and this is why it explains, there's an idea in the Bible called an iri nidachat. An iri nidachat means a city which collectively has sinned in idolatry, and all of the people and all of the belongings in the city are earmarked to be destroyed. However, what about somebody who doesn't live in that city, but his possessions are in the city? The Gemara says, why should that person's possessions be destroyed? And specifically, the Gemara uses an analogy of a very righteous holy man. Why should his money be destroyed? And the Gemara answers, because his money was there, he may appear righteous and holy, and he might really be so. But when it comes to money, he has a weakness and loves money. And his love of money is what got him involved in the first place with people that led to this. By the way, speaking of money, and I mentioned Korach before, Gemara says that Korach, just to give you an idea how rich he was, and this is so tongue-in-cheek Talmudic as well, it says that he had 300 mules, and the only thing that these mules carried, 300, were the keys to which he could open up his chests of money. And what's the Talmudic tongue-in-cheek? The Talmud needs you to know that the keys were not made out of metal, but they were made out of leather so that they could get more keys into those bags. Right? It's not enough there was 300 mules packed with keys, but you got to know where they were leather keys, because that's how many keys were just the keys for opening up all the money that he had. Okay, I'm going to just skip here to, actually, you know what? This is kind of cool. Maybe I won't, because it's sort of important. This section is called Torah sensitivity to people's money. The Gemara in Baba Basra says that a community is allowed to pray even on Shabbat to avoid financial loss. A person may leave Israel to avoid inflation or financial ruin. The Gemara in Megillah, this is a very famous Gemara, many of you might be familiar with. It's the story of Rav seeing Rav Huna on Rosh Hashanah, and Rav saw that Rav Huna was very poor. He was wearing like flax clothing, and he gave him an amazing blessing he should become rich. And the next year when he came back, he was like gold, silk, thread, like he was like a dude, all like, totally like studded out. And he says, look, Rav, your blessing, it came true. And Rav said, shame. He said, what do you mean by shame? He said, well, when I said to you, you should be blessed, you should have said back to me and to you as well. In other words, if the blessing is already going to work, spread the wealth, which is why many people have a tradition. If somebody blesses you, you say, Kain Lamar, to you as well, or Kain L'Kol Yisrael, or Kain L'Kul Olam, that the blessing should be spread among the entire world. The Gemara in Gittin says that there are three things which could wipe out a person's money. One is dealing with money on Shabbat, and another one, I didn't go into the other one, it's too abstract, but the other one is having Shabbat lunch too late in the day. The Gemara in Krisos says that becoming depressed can ruin a person's fortune. I'm sure you all know the famous Rabbi Nachman story about the guy with a huge diamond, and no one in his village, it was too big, no one could cash it in. They said you have to go somewhere, and he goes on the river, or across the ocean. He says to the captain, look, I have no money, but look at my diamond. When I get to the other side, I'll cash it, I'll pay you double. So he gave him the nicest room on the boat, and every day he would take out the diamond, he would look at it, he would sing. One day he fell asleep, and the cleaning lady came, and she shut the curtain, or whatever, the carpet out the window, whoop, there goes the diamond. And he realized, instead of freaking out, he would just have faith in God, and he would maintain that same look, so that nothing would happen. The captain comes and says, look, I'm carrying a huge amount of grain on this boat. If I bring it in, I'm going to be taxed heavily. Can I ascribe it to you, and then when we get into port, you will sign it back to me, and you will cash your diamond, and you will pay me, and they make the deal. They pull into port, the captain dies, and now he has all the grain. That's Rabbi Nachman uses that the story as to show the karma of how things go, but the key is never to become depressed. Kol olam kulo geshet samod ve'aikahi lo lefachet klal. Okay, Yiboneh Ksuas also brings out there that, I mentioned this before, if a person gives more than a fifth of his money away, it's actually prohibited. And Gemara Menachah says that God has mercy on Jews' money, even for doing mitzvot. Believe it or not, there are financial limits as to how much a person is allowed to spend on performing commandments. Also, a rich person has to have sensitivity to poor people. The Gemara in Moed Katan talks about Rabbi Gamliel, who put on very inexpensive linens, tachitim we call them, for being buried. People would wear all kinds of things for their burial, and when he saw that the poor people were embarrassed to have public burials because they didn't have the clothing, he, as one of the richest men in the generation, came out in the poor person's clothing to set the standard. By the way, an interesting law many people don't know is anagrams. I think that's what they're called, right? Your initials? Monograms. Right, monograms, thank you. That actually in Jewish law, a person should not get monograms on their clothing. Why? Because the idea is that they will then, at some point, we don't throw away clothing, we put it out in a public place where poor people can come and take it, and the poor person will be very embarrassed wearing somebody else's initials. So therefore, even to that degree of sensitivity, when buying clothing for myself, I already have to have in mind the end game of where this clothing could go and have that kind of sensitivity. Gemara in Sanhedrin says as well that a judge who is dishonest in judging money matters, God will personally collect that soul. The Gemara says that A person will not see real blessing from their wealth if it's not used for the benefit of Torah scholars. And the Gemara warns that a person who does not support a poor person who knocks on his door will himself one day become a poor person and go and knock on the door. To which I also brought that Gemara with the Gemara in Shabbos, which to me I think is brilliant. We should make bumper stickers out of this one. The Gemara in Shabbos on 104a says that it is incumbent upon the rich man to go out and find the poor person, and not for the poor person to come begging at the rich person's door. And even honor, which comes to honor in people through money, it was only people who were honored with their money that did things for the poor. As the Gemara in Eruvin says that both Rebbe and Rabbi Akiva showed great honor to rich people who helped the poor, because the Gemara says that the world is only at peace before God when kindness and the needs of the poor are taken care of. Okay, and therefore the last section here is kosher money. So the Gemara in Sanhedrin says, yes, money is a good power. Money can put a person on his feet. Baba Metzia Rav Ashi says that money talks for people, and that a person who has money has no need for a broker, because the money cuts the deal. Actually, it reminds me of this story that this wealthy man from Britain told me. He said once in Europe there was a very, very rich man, and the rabbis would always come to him for his advice on various community issues. And when he was done, he would put a couple of little bags of golden coins that the rabbis would then take and leave. Anyhow, he had a financial reversal. He was no more money. And he noticed, well, that's kind of funny. No money, no rabbi, right? No tiki, no laundry. No money, no rabbi. They weren't showing up. And then, I guess like Donald Trump, he suddenly made a huge fortune that came back again. And amazing. Voila. Rebbe's. It's like my friend who once said, he said, I don't understand. Every time my wife leaves us and travels overseas, the magic refrigerator doesn't work. So it's like the same idea. Suddenly he gets the money, here come the rabbis. So the rabbis show up, he says, wait a minute, before you tell me what you're here for, and he puts the bags on the money on the table, he says, talk to them. That's what you came for, right? So that was that's sort of the equation. But the truth be told, that this is a powerful thing. And so powerful, if it's kosher money, here's an example of the dead coming back to help the living. The Gemara says that Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, after he had died, appeared to his nephew in a dream, advising him how to avoid losing a fortune. And here's an example of the living going to the dead, because the Gemara in Brachos says that Zeiri contacted his dead landlady to find out where his money had been hidden. Because we see by Yaakov, if the money is kosher, it's holy, it's valuable, we never look down at money, we never treat it lightly. But on the other hand, we don't become arrogant through the money. The Gemara in Chulin says that, this is I think very important, that financial responsibility in taking care and guarding one's property and finances is a mitzvah. It's an obligation. And the Gemara there also makes an equation between cleanliness with health and dirty with poverty. The Gemara says that one of Job's greatest attributes, this is kind of like, a lot of people go to the Hasidic Rebbe. I actually have my thing in my pocket. I still have my dollar from the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Right? So the idea that the Rebbe giving out the coin and the coin brings blessing. Where's the source of that? Job. Famous man Job. So the Gemara says that Job, one of his greatest attributes was that he would give money generously to the poor, and anybody who received the coin from Job would find it brought with it good luck. And here's the conclusion of the class, which is, it's all about God. The Gemara in Horios points out that it's not about being clever. It's really not. Financial success is not about smart people. I'm sure all of us have met very rich people who you can't begin to understand how that happened. I mean, it's off the chart. It's not because they were smart or clever, in the least. Not that all of them are like that, but certainly there's enough to be noticeable. So the Gemara says, they bring an example of a Talmud Chacham who was so brilliant. This is Gemara's language about how brilliant he was. Sometimes I feel like, if you remember Rodney Dangerfield, how brilliant was he? So he was so brilliant that it says he could calculate how many drops of water are in the ocean. But yet, he could never make $1. He was perpetually financially busted. On the other hand, if the money's not yours, you can't keep it. This is also a wonderful Gemara that you should read to your children and grandchildren in Shabbos. It's a Gemara called Yossi, or Yosala, who loved Shabbat. And here was this guy who was just happy-go-lucky, nothing could go wrong, everything was like Bojangles, it was always fine. And one day there was a very wealthy man who was told that he was going to lose all of his fortune to Yasala the Schlepper, Yasala the Schnorr, whatever degrading word people use, God forbid, for poor people. And he said, no way! And he converted all of his power and wealth into this one enormous coin, which as he was walking over the bridge, fell out of his hand. A fish bought it. And the fisherman caught the fish, but it was late Friday. And they had no idea who would buy such a big fish. But they knew that whatever money Yasala had, he would always spend the covered Shabbat. And so Yasala forked out the $1, came home, cut it open, and there was the ruby. If it's not yours, you cannot hold on to it. And if it is yours, it will definitely find its way to you. Now, some wild stories I brought down to sort of wrap up here that exemplify this. I don't understand this Gemara, so I'm just going to say right off the bat, but I'll just tell it over as it's written. Gemara in Bava Metzia says that Rebbe Lezer, the son of Shimon Bar Yochai, his wife became very frustrated with him, trying to heal him from his illness, and left him in the house. She said, that's it, I'm out of here. And just left him there in bed, and she went back to her father's home. The Gemara says that the day after she left, there was a knock at the door, and at the door were 60 sailors, each one with 60 servants, and each servant with 60 pouches of money. Okay, whatever. Another wild story. Gemara in the Dorim. There's a couple actually in the Dorim. They're all one by one, but I picked out the one of Rav Gamda. Rav Gamda had a few coins left in his pocket, and he saw some sailors who were about to go overseas. And he said, look, here, take my last few coins, buy me some schora, give me some shmata, something I could make a few bucks with. So they went, and finally they came back, and they said, look, with the amount of money you gave us, there was nothing we could buy you except a monkey. He said, that's what you bought me, was a monkey? And as they were about to give him the monkey, exit stage right, boom, the monkey cut out. And the sailors, oh my gosh, not only did we only get him a monkey, but now the monkey's gone. So they run after the monkey, right? They're jumping down, and finally the monkey jumps down into a hole, and they go down following the hole. And when they finally find the monkey's jumping up and down on a chest filled with gold and precious coins. So, if God wants you to get it, it will definitely get to you, not to worry. The Gemara Bracha says to qualify that there are three things which only God determines. And one of them is famine, God forbid, the other is abundance, and the third is a good leader. And here is the point I made before. Even though on Rosh Hashanah, on the new year, it's inscribed as to what our financial status will be, among other things, that is only a suggestion. That is a template. And the Gemara Moed Katan says clearly that prayer can override faith. There is no such thing as faith. Faith is just the way it's been set up, the way it matures in reality. It's directly dependent on us. This is free will overrides destiny. And the vehicle to free will is through prayer. And the Gemara says that Rava, one of the great Amoraim, he prayed for three things, and he was awarded two of them. The three things he prayed for was to be wise, which certainly you can't go more than 4 pages in Shas, or maybe Yishalmi, you could, but not Bavli, and not see the name Rava. He prayed to become rich, where he became extremely rich. And the only thing that was denied him, he prayed to become humble. And he did not become as humble as he wanted to be. Which, by the way, is another Gemara. I think it's in Sota. I don't have it written down here. But the Gemara is talking about different rabbis. When they died, certain things left the world. And one particular rabbi, they say when he died, now there's no more humility in the world. And I always love that Gemara because somebody says, wait a minute, I'm still here, I'm humble. Right, so, which is really the beauty of true humility, because he saw himself like, I'm looking at you. He didn't realize he was pointing at himself. He was like looking around for somebody, hey look, check this guy out, he's humble. Because that was the beauty of how humble he really was, because he didn't see him as me. He saw himself as just another person, happens to be real humble, and he wanted to point that out. And so therefore, in conclusion, is the wildest Gemara, which is the Gemara Brachot, that says the best way to make a fortune, in fact, the Gemara says you will double your income, and the language of the Gemara is your income will fly to you like a bird, is if you make God your CEO. And I'll just tell you a personal story. I don't know if any of you are from the New York area or you know the expression, but there's a term, used to be a term in New York called the 57th Street lawyer. Probably had like your offices in the Squibb building or something, but that was like a lawyer who really was Fifth Avenue and 57th, made a lot of money. So I once met one of these guys because he had, I don't want to mention his name, but you know him, because he became very, very rich, and, I'm sorry, he was very rich, he became very religious, he became a Baal Tshuva. And I went to meet him, and we're talking, and I said to him, you know, how did you become religious? What happened? And he said, well, one day I was sitting down thinking about how I made all my money. And when I analyzed each incident, each one was like a bizarre story. Like I was in Puerto Rico in the Hilton, and I had to actually meet somebody, and while I was waiting for the person I had to meet, I met the person sitting next to me. And we wound up doing a multi-million-dollar deal. I know who that person was. I didn't go there to meet that person. So he said what happened was, every time I sat down, I looked over all of my fortune, I realized 70% of my income were through the hand of God. That makes God the controlling partner in my life. It was that clear, like a limited partner. God was the general partner. God was my CEO. So therefore God, okay, now God's bossing me around. He says, put on tefillin, I put on tefillin. That's kind of how he left it. And the last line here is, the Gemara Kedushin says that the person must realize that all income comes from heaven. This is a very famous Gemara where the Gemara says, did you ever see, I'm not sure if I'm getting this exactly correct, did you ever see a wolf as a store owner? Did you ever see all these different animals, struggling for their parnasa, and they were only created to serve man? Why should man have to struggle for his work? And the Gemara answers, because we've corrupted ourselves. And the blessing which comes down is now no longer fluid. This is hinted at in the letter Lamed, which is why, I don't want to get too into Kabbalah, which is why the word for night, Laila, has in it Yud Kei. Yud Kei in God's name always represents the higher world. Like the Vilna Gaon in his introduction to Shir Shirim, we have Yud Kei, and below Yud Kei is Vav Kei. This is why you have positive and negative commandments. The Yud can only be brought down into this world through action, positive action. That becomes the Vav, the pipe that brings that down. The Hey, the negative commandments, by not touching it, remains a Hey by the time it comes in the lower world. That's why Vav and Hey is the expression of holiness in this world, while Yud and Hey is holiness in the higher world. That's, by the way, why the word mitzvah. If you look at mitzvah, I don't want to get too off the point, the word mitzvah, the last two letters of the four letters are God's name of Vav and Hey. And Mem and Sadi, the first two letters, which are the two letters common in Chumetz and Matzah, Mem Sadi, in Atbash are actually Yud and Hey, which means that the word mitzvah is actually God's name. And this is the secret behind Nasa v'Nishma. By doing, you begin to hear. Because since imbued in the commandments is the holiness of God, when one actually becomes involved in that, it reveals Shem Hashem. It reveals that sense of God in the world. So the word Laila, which is the hidden part of God, it doesn't hide the higher part of God. That's why it has the Yud and the Hey in the word. But it has on both levels the letter Lamed. Lamed is two words. That's why there's two Lameds. One word is to learn, and the same word, different vowels, is to teach, to give, and to take, to receive, to share, right? That's why Rabbi Gedaliah says we have two lakes in Israel. One of them is a Dead Sea, and one of them is a living sea. And they both draw from the same source. Why is one dead? Because it doesn't give. It only takes. So it's dead. Whereas the Kinneret takes and gives. So therefore, that taking and that giving, that expression of the Lamed. How does a scribe write a Lamed? This is really interesting. The scribe's Lamed begins at the top in a straight line down halfway. That's the flow of God into this world. It's pure, it's direct, it's unadulterated, it is as it was. That is the beginning of the learning experience. But then the scribe moves the pen to the baseline. And instead of it being a reciprocal line that goes straight up, which would be like a vav, it actually goes in a curve and then cuts back to meet the upper line. That's what the lamed is. Comes down, flat line, and then curves down to that point. The points are lined up, but the process is the human experience is going through the ordeal, going through the process. Sometimes the light's all shining on me, other times I can barely see. That's the process. But from heaven, it comes down clearly. So even in the night, even in the Laila, there's still the direct line of God in the Yud-Keh, but there's the learning and the teaching, the giving and the taking experience through which we can unfold that night into day. Vayamahu Hashem Echad U'Shmo Echad. That the night will become the day, and that is the Tikkun Levana. And when the moon is rectified, that will be the time that even when the cow will jump over the moon, it will be part of the service of God rather than, God forbid, the distraction from our purpose in life. Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, if there are any questions, Rabbi Aaron has volunteered to. Oh, there really is a question?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
When you're talking about the shuttle coming, my son coming to the right side or the left side, so what determines your acceptance of it or something else?
That's a very good question. What really determines it is the way in which you prepare yourself to receive it. In other words, like in software, all software ultimately boils down to 0, 1, like ASCII, right? So it's binary, it's free will. So if when the software hits the 1, it continues. If it hits the 0, it reincarnates, if you will. So everything that we really have in our lives, our free will, is only at every single second I'm either in touch with God or I'm disconnected. This is hinted at in the tefillin, because a person can be a Jew because their mother was a Jew, or like converts, they call themselves Jews by choice. So, but on the physical level, if your body is Jewish, so then the tefillin on the arm, this is Rachel, and the knot is Jacob, and they have to touch because the body is the body. But on the tefillin on the head, this is actually Leah, and this is Israel, and they don't touch. But what happens is the way to connect the knot from behind the head to the tefillin is through your kivun, through your makshava, through your thoughts. So if you are thinking about God, you are connecting all of the night to the day, so to speak. If, God forbid, a person's not thinking about God, they're thinking about something other than God, that circuit breaks and disconnects that. So therefore, if the person's connected, they're bringing it down on the right side. And if disconnected, God forbid, God will still give us. This is also hinted at, I don't want to go too much in there, but like on the shaking of the lulav and the directions and how we move the winds and things like that. Yes. So you're my friend. Why are you asking a question?
Well, the question cements our friendship, I hope.
Oh, good.
Our childhood, Mother Hubbard, nursery rhymes, please remind us of that little poem, hey diddle diddle, cat in the fiddle, the feathers of the moon. I don't know the rest of it, but I don't get the significance of that reference.
Oh, I wasn't really referring per se to the text.
Oh, what is
The idea was the contrast between service of God, which is having the faith in the darkness of this world symbolized by the shrunken moon, versus the temporary distraction of money symbolized by the golden calf, which was the idol that we built in lieu of service of God. So I was simply kind of doing the idea of the cow jumping is that sort of passage of moment in time distracted by money, as opposed to the moon, which is sort of like fixture, but not as a fixture of itself, but a fixture of what will be in the future. By the way, it's a little interesting side. The Vilna Gaon says that, you know the famous eye for an eye? So in Hebrew, it's ayin tachet ayin. Tachet in Hebrew from tuchas. Tachet means under. So if you take the word in Hebrew for ayin, eye, and you move each letter one down in the alphabet, it spells the word kesef, which is money. And this is where we learn, or a hint to where we learn, the idea that when a person is obligated for financial damages, you don't go and poke out another person's eye, right? What if a blind person poked out somebody's eye? Well, no eye here, right? Or what if the guy was a cyclops? Well, it's not fair. This guy has one eye left, but now he's like got no eye. So it doesn't mean eye for an eye physically. It means the value of that person's eye. Because even one person's eye might be more valuable to him than another person's eye. What if this one particular guy is like a diamond cutter and it's really, with the other person, I don't know, it makes matzah. I'm just making this up, of course. But the idea is that it's the value that's about it. So that's how he learned. And the other way he learns it is also because when you look through glass, you see the other side. But when you put silver on the other side of the glass, it becomes a mirror, and all we see is ourselves. So that's kind of like when we can remove the idolatry, the idols of silver and gold, we can see through to where we're really heading. All right, thank you all so much.